Like all leaders, Ellington had to feature certain obligatory tunes night after night, and the men could get heartily sick of them.
Yes, at times, yeah. Yeah, but what can you do? I mean, but that's what the people expected. Satin Doll and all those things. That's what they expected.
Here and there, surprisingly sanctified swing items were held in distaste by the very players famous for being on the original hit record. Glenn Miller's In the Mood, with its famous riff and its saxophone exchange between Tex Beneke and Al Klink, was an example. In fact, one of that celebrated pair had no time for Glenn Miller himself either.
Al Klink couldn't stand him. He felt that Glenn was very unfair to him with the disposition of solos. Tex was the star of the band. Played all the solos. Al, I think the only thing he played was a battle in the mood. Al Klink was a great tenor man. Make no bones about it. He could play good jazz.
Jerry Jerome, who confides that although Al Klink died decades after Glenn Miller's disappearance, he retained one parting shot to be fired at Miller when both men had gone.
Apparently, in his will, Al had said, I'd like this certain thing to be played as a dedication to my term with Glenn Miller. So at the very end of the memorial, and all the different guys would come up and play trumpet solo. Dick Hyman played a piano solo and some guy. At the very end, Reverend Genzel said, and this was what Al Klink wanted us to play for you. Apparently a vocal group had gotten together and had done a vocal on In the Mood, imitating chickens clucking. Unbelievable. It was a great touch, and everybody walked out, of course, as though they'd heard then Saints Go Marching In, and that kind of thing. But that was where Al was.
Stevens and the version of In the Mood played at the funeral of Al Klink. Swing band veterans, I suppose, all look back sardonically on some aspects of their past. But for most, that time, 55 or 60 or more years ago, looks like a cornucopia of fun. A hectic age when musicians received more adulation than they'd ever expected and more work than they could reasonably do.
The longest day I ever had with Benny was a record date at 8 o'clock in the morning to 11, went to rehearse the Camel show. Then we did Swing in a Dream and when Louis was there. And then we went and played the Waldorf. And then after Waldorf, we did a benefit at Madison Square Garden. So I didn't sleep from 6 in the morning until about 6 again. But they got by, boy. They all played good, even though we stayed up late. But hell, we were young, you know. We kept drinking, and we felt good.
This is the National Broadcasting Company. You like swing?
Listen to Benny Goodman, the king of swing. Makers of Camel cigarettes present the Saturday Night Camel Caravan with Benny Goodman and the greatest assembly of swing artists in the world today. And again tonight, Benny brings you the #1 lady in the whole kingdom of swing, Mildred Bailey. And here is the king of swing, Benny Goodman.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the Saturday Night Camel Caravan. It's 10 o'clock here in New York, 9 in Chicago, 8 in Denver, and 7 in California. But no matter where you are or what time it is, it's still Saturday night, and that means it's time for a little fun. So if you can use some music, we'd like to join you.
Roll 'em, Fletcher, roll 'em. Those choruses were played by Fletcher Henderson, Ted Besley, Toots Mondello, Ziggy Elman, and, of course, Benny himself.
It was all a good thing that gradually came to an end.
Little by little, it seemed that the bands weren't growing what they should have been, you know. The hotels started doing away with their dance floors and things. I don't know, it's strange. It was a strange transition, wasn't it?
When the time came to leave the big-name bands and perhaps do studio work for radio, TV or movies, as Joe Lippman and Milt Bernhardt did, it was unmistakably a relief.
The part of it that made it impossible was to get in a bus and spend most of the day. You couldn't read, and I was then at a disadvantage. If I couldn't read a book, and it was impossible, the buses bumped. So to even try to read a newspaper was out of the question. We become bus sick from looking at the bouncing words. But we spent most of a day going from one town to another, average of 500 miles. It's a big country. When we got there, if we're lucky, it isn't time for the job. Then we can eat. But if we're not lucky, and half of the time we weren't, there's no time for food. Imagine now you've got to get on a stand, an auditorium, maybe it's a concert, and play, and a lot of people have come to hear this band, many a long distance. And so we know that. And there's a matter of personal pride, and we've got to play as good as they would expect us to.
But what a grand period of music it had been while it lasted, full of memorable tunes and stories, more of which we'll hear next year, when the memory of swing is still older, and this series, my producer Graham Pass and I, will return.
In the opinion of hot music critics, Count Basie is one of the best dance orchestras in the country, and his original piano compositions are world famous. Next Monday, July 11th, he begins his first New York engagement at Manhattan's well-known nightclub, the Famous Door, with the following orchestra personnel: Lester Young, Herschel Evans, Ronald Jack Washington, and Earl Warren on the saxophones, Dan Miner, Dickie Wells, and Henry Morton in the trombone department, with Ed Lewis, Harry Edison, and Buck Creighton handling the trumpets. The rhythm section is composed of Fred Green on guitar, Walter Page on bass, Joe Jones at the drum, the Count himself at the piano, and Helen Humes and James Rushing as featured vocalists. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the familiar theme music that introduces Count Basie and his orchestra in another program of America Dances, broadcast over a coast-to-coast network and to Great Britain through the facilities of the British Broadcasting Corporation.
Or as we say nowadays, 88 to 91 FM, Radio 2 from the BBC.